Poston has invited members of the Danish Editorial Cartoonists Union to draw Mohammed as they see him. End quote. They did that. One cartoon depicting Mohammed with a bomb in his turban was particularly controversial. Once the cartoons became known outside Denmark, it took some time for them to become known, they caused several Middle Eastern countries to boycott Danish products and goods, and also caused protests and riots in several of those same countries and in Denmark as well. More than 100 people were killed in these protests and riots. The Danish embassy in Pakistan was bombed, and Denmark's embassies in Syria, Lebanon, and Iran were set on fire. There have been several attempts and plots to kill the creator of the most controversial of the cartoons, and in 2010 the Danish police arrested 5 men who were suspected of planning an attack on the offices of Jylland-Posten, the newspaper that first published the cartoons. That much is pretty well known. What is only slightly less well known is that soon after the first Danish embassy was torched, soon after the first death threat, soon after the first attempted murder of the cartoonist, the editor of a newspaper, The Optimist, in Skagen, Denmark, asked his staff cartoonist, he had only one, it was a weekly newspaper with a small circulation, to draw a cartoon depicting in some way or other the controversy over the by now infamous cartoons of Mohammed. Me? The cartoonist asked. His name was Jens Badrup. He'd worked at the paper for 9 years. Mostly he drew cartoons of local interest. Tourists eating hot dogs while walking too slowly on the pedestrian mall. Grizzled fishermen acting surprised at seeing fish they just caught on display at the market, as though to say, "What are you doing here?" Scanians caught in bad weather and making the best of it. In fact, his most recent cartoon had been of a man and woman standing under a roof, and the man saying, "At least we have a roof over our heads," and the woman not saying anything, just looking miserable because she was drenched, and so was he, because the rain was blowing sideways, and the roofed structure they were standing under had no walls. Yes, you. Why? The cartoonist asked. Of course, he'd been following the whole thing on television, on the radio, and the newspaper. It made him anxious, angry, annoyed, the way things do when you don't know whom to blame. But then again, those cartoons had been published in a Copenhagen newspaper, and Skagen was as far away from Copenhagen as you could get and still be in Denmark. In fact, it was common for people in Skagen, after learning of some outrageous news coming out of the nation's capital 5 hours to the south, to shrug it off by saying, "But that's Copenhagen." "Because this is important," the editor said. "I think you'll do a good job. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have do this than you." The cartoonist recognized that this was tainted praise, or at least praise with an ulterior motive, but that did not mean he was immune to it. He thought for a minute. He would have asked his wife her opinion, but she had gone to visit her parents in Aarhus and wasn't due back in Skagen for another week. He could have called her on the phone, of course, but things had not been going too well with them. Lately, every little disagreement threatened to turn into a large argument, which then threatened to turn into a referendum on the marriage itself. And one of the things they most often argued about was the cartoonist's unshakable optimism, his belief that everything was going to be just fine. He knew if he called and asked her whether he should draw the cartoon, she would question his mental health. "I don't know what you're so worried about," he would then say. "I think everything's going to be just fine." And then she would mockingly call him the Skagen Optimist, which, in addition to being the name of the newspaper, was also the name of his weekly cartoon. In fact, the cartoon of the man and his wife getting wet from the sideways rain had been based on something that had happened to them. Twice. The cartoonist thought that by having the wife in the cartoon remain silent, in real life she had not remained silent, his wife would not recognize herself in the cartoon. But this turned out to be yet another example of his over-optimism. So instead of calling his wife, the cartoonist let his mind argue with itself, the way it does when it's about to let you do something that you'll later regret. "You really shouldn't do this," his mind said. "But I'll do a good job. The editor said so himself." The editor is a liar. "Yes, but no one is a liar all the time." "But you don't even have a strong opinion about all this." Who better to draw a cartoon like this?